as Elizabeth said, I'm a neonatologist. So that means basically I'm a baby doctor. I take care of newborns in the intensive care unit. So we have a separate intensive care unit for newborns. So either born at our hospital or newborn babies from other hospitals that are sent to us to provide care that they can't provide. And so I work at UCSF in San Francisco, and it's a 57-bed unit. That means we can have up to 57 babies at a time, and it's usually in the 40s or 50s. We have many doctors. I'm not taking care of 57 babies by myself. It's a whole network of doctors, and I'll talk about the system. But basically, so that's what I do. I take care of babies that are sick, not well babies, so that require kind of an escalated level of care for whatever reason. And I can go through some what those diagnoses are. But some are premature. Some have heart disease that requires surgery. Some have other surgical needs. Some just have an infection and need antibiotics. So those are kind of some of the standard things we care for. So for the training that I got to be a neonatologist, so it's 4 years of undergraduate education and then medical school, which is for typically a minimum of 4 years, sometimes 5 years if you're doing a research project or something else, or if you're doing an MD combined with a PhD, it's 8 years, 4 years of medical school and 4 years of PhD. But the standard is 4 or 5 years of medical school. Then you choose, and then so you graduate from medical school and you choose your residency, right? So you can go into any number of things, and I chose pediatrics. So pediatrics is a 3-year residency. So the first year is what we call internship, and then the second and third year are the rest of the residency. But it's all combined into one 3-year training program, and that's standard for pediatrics. The other 3-year training programs are internal medicine, some emergency medicine programs, and family medicine. And then other things like neurology is 4 years, surgery is 5 years. So it depends on what kind of training you want to do, how long it is, but it tends to be in the 3 to 5 year range. Neurosurgery is 7 years, and that includes 2 years of research, but generally most are in the 3 to 5 year range. So that means I did 3 years of general pediatrics training. So you get exposed to everything: inpatient, outpatient, older kids, babies, also subspecialties like, gastroenterology, cardiology, infectious disease, et cetera. And I did I went to undergraduate and medical school on the East Coast of Brown University. And then I did my pediatrics residency at UCLA. So after pediatrics residency, or whatever residency you do, you go get a job. So I could be an outpatient, but it would be as a general pediatrician, because at that point, my training would only be as a general pediatrician. So like for my wife, she stopped her training there, and she's been a general pediatrician at Kaiser for almost 20 years. But then if you want to subspecialize, that means if you want to take care of particular types of kids or adults or whatever, then that's additional training, and that's called a fellowship. So I did a neonatology fellowship, which is technically called neonatal perinatal medicine. That means I did a fellowship in just taking care of sick babies. And so that's an additional 3 years. For pediatrics, most fellowships are 3 years. There's occasionally ones like genetics and some other things that can be shorter, or you can make them longer if you want to do extra research before you join faculty or get a job. But the standard is 3 years. It's similar for internal medicine. There's a little more leeway. So some are like 2-year clinical fellowships, but typically it's around 3 years. So that means I did 4 years of med school, and then 3 years of pediatrics, and then 3 years of fellowship, and then I was done with my training. And then I became officially a neonatologist, and I joined the faculty at UCSF. And the term we use is an attending. You're an attending neonatologist. And so that's the basics of my training. Actually, I'll stop there, see if anybody has questions about the logistics or the specifics of the training. Does anybody have questions about that? No. Okay, so let me go to then what do I do now? So once again, I take care of babies in the intensive care nursery. And so I work at an academic institution. I work at UCSF. So that means there's many different types of jobs. Even in specific specialties or specific training, there's many different types of jobs you can get or do. Basically, you can create your own path. It isn't like you have to do this, you have to do that. You can do you can split up your time how you want. And so I also do research. So the way, and I do research on the new, because I'm a neonatologist, I'm interested in and my background is in neuroscience. So my research is on the newborn brain, ways that we can repair the newborn brain after injury. I can talk a little bit about that later, but I don't want to get too stuck in the weeds. But as far as how my time is divided, so at an academic center, typically you work anywhere between, and this is, like I said, I work in an intensive care unit. So it's called a critical care specialty. And the reason I'm bringing that up now is because it's busy and it's kind of high intensity. And so we as critical care physicians do a lot less clinical time than some of the other specialties. So you have breaks in between. So for my schedule, I do 8 weeks of clinical service a year. And then I do anywhere from 28 to 36 overnight calls. Because, one of us has to be in the hospital at all times. So that's what we do. We do some weekends and overnight calls. So 8 to 10 weeks of clinical service and then 36 overnight calls. And the rest of the time I'm doing either my research or I'm doing administrative stuff like meetings and things like that. But that's fairly standard for an academic neonatologist that does research, that kind of, somewhere about 25 to 35% of your time is doing clinical work and the rest is doing your research and your other things. Now let me distinguish that. So you can work in an academic center like UCSF and not do research and just be be a primary kind of clinical neonatologist. So for them, if your primary work is the clinical work, you still do other things, like you might do some outpatient clinic or you might have administrative meetings, but their schedule is more like 16 weeks of clinical service a year. So about twice what I do, but they don't have the research responsibilities. But that's pretty standard for an academic neonatologist or an academic critical care physician. At community hospitals or other types of units, there's going to be more clinical time. There's going to be less of those other responsibilities, whether it's research or administrative. You still have those, but you're going to do more clinical time. So that it might be as many as maybe 26 weeks of clinical service a year. So it means half the time you're on clinical service and half the time you're not. But those tend to be lower intensity because I work at a hospital that takes care of babies that have cardiac disease and all these other things that are very complicated and take a lot of effort. That's kind of high intensity, and you don't want to burn out. So that's why there's less clinical time. But at a community hospital, maybe more bread and butter neonatology, where it's premature infants or other babies that are relatively well and just need antibiotics. And so you're able to spend more time doing clinical work without, burning out or killing yourself. So that's why the clinical requirements may be higher there. You also get paid a lot more at a community hospital than you do in an academic center. So that's the trade-off also. So that's basically how my time is split up, about 25+% clinical, and the rest I do research. And I do both basic science and clinical research, but I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to, if you want to hear about it, I'm happy to talk about it, but I don't want to get go too much into those details. As far as what I do on a daily basis, so when I'm on clinical service, it tends to be, and every hospital is different, but it's ballpark, it's basically 8 to 5, and you go in and you get sign on what happened overnight. And then you take care of, you round on all the babies with the team, and I'll talk about the details of the team. And you come up with your plans, and then you do your exams and write your notes. And then if there's new admissions, you admit those, or if there's, high risk deliveries, you go to those, or sometimes there's surprise delivery, deliveries that you think are going to be fine. And then there's some surprise complication. And then, we get a page and we go running to the delivery room to go resuscitate that baby. And so that's why there always has to be a team of people there in the unit at all times, because you never know when there's going to be a surprise complication, which is typical to most critical care, specialties. Somebody has to be there because even if everything seems like it's going fine, something can happen and you just have to be ready for it. So it's basically 8 to 5. And I spend a lot of times also talking to parents, so typically, the details also of how we're split up. Like I said, we have up to 57 or 58 babies. We split it up into 3 teams. So and the different teams take care of different babies. So I tend to be on the team that takes care of the babies with, severe lung disease or surgical complications or sometimes cardiac disease, as opposed to the other team. There's two other teams. One takes care of primarily the premature infants. And then there's a third team that takes care of the way we set it up is they take care of the kids that are a little less sick, like a baby that just needs antibiotics for a while, but doesn't need any respiratory support. But that's the team that also goes running off to deliveries or those sorts of things, and at a moment's notice. And so on the team too, so I'm an attending. That means when I'm on service, like I'm sort of the boss of the team. And then we have some nurse practitioners and we have a fellow. We always have a fellow. So once again, that's a person who's finished their pediatrics training and is specializing to be a neonatologist. And then we have some residents. So there's some people who are in their general pediatrics training who are doing this rotation as part of that training. And then occasionally medical students. We also have nutritionists and pharmacists and sometimes discharge coordinators. So sometimes it can be a really big team, anywhere from a handful of people to like 7 or 8 people that are rounding on the babies. And that's what we do. We go. And so typically we rarely have more than 20 babies on one team. It's usually somewhere around 16 or 18 babies. And basically we spend all morning then going bedside to bedside, talking about what happened, talking about our plans, updating the parents, and going to the next bedside. And and like I said, then after that, we do our exams and we do our notes and talk about our plans and admit new babies. And that's basically how the day is structured. And I'll stop there and see what questions you have about anything at all I said, or anything I didn't say about medical school or choosing pediatrics or anything at all. Let me know what questions you guys have. And I see here that I'm going to open up the chat. So, and I can see the chat. So this is from Roger asking details on the clinical side and the research side. So that's a very good question. So let me give you some context. So I kind of went through my training and I went straight through. I did some research during the summers, but I didn't take like a lot of time to do a research project, which many people do in medical school. And sometimes for some medical students, that's 5 years, because then they can do a research project every year, whether it's clinical or basic science or whatever. And some people choose to do a PhD. And so I didn't do any of that. I went straight through. But I did like the idea of research. And I did a little bit during residency. And during your fellowship for pediatrics, it's required you do a research project. So you have a 3-year fellowship. It's really about a year of clinical training, give or take, and then 2 years of research, kind of depending on the specialty, how they schedule it is different. But that's part of your training. It can be any kind of, it can be a QI research project, which is quality improvement on the clinical side. It could be a clinical research project, it could be basic science, it could be anything. And so I did basic science research. Like I said, I had a background in neuroscience, and so I was interested in the newborn brain and repairing it. And so I did a research project during fellowship, and I really liked it. And I decided I wanted to continue to try to do research. Now, what that means is, so you do your fellowship, and you do your research and hopefully get a publication or 2 out of it that looks good. And then you apply you start applying for grants. And there's many different types of grants depending on what stage of your career. But basically you're asking for money usually from the NIH, but it could be from foundations or private or whatever it is, to help support your research. Because, you need money to do the research, but even more than that, you need somebody to help protect your time to do research. Because the hospitals are going to pay my salary from when I'm over there doing something else and not doing clinical care. So part of the grants is paying for protecting my time to do research. It gives them money to do the research, but then also protecting the time. So like I said, I don't want to get too stuck in the weeds, but so I decided I wanted to do research. I liked doing research. I started with rats. Now I do mice. I do other things too. Like I said, I actually do clinical research for babies related to protecting and repairing the newborn brain. But I liked it. And so, I got some papers out and I successfully applied for grants. And so I'm still going on with that. And the bottom line is I enjoyed it. And I had a lot of support from my mentors. I was a little worried, and this is something I want to say to you guys. Like I said, I didn't have a lot of research experience and I don't have a PhD, but I liked it. But, overwhelming isn't the wrong word, but you see these other people with these strong research histories, like, wow, I can't compete with them. But you can't, I want to say, if you want to try it, if you want to do it, then do it. Like there's definitely paths to success with that. And I don't want, it would have been easy to say, well, I don't have that background, and so maybe I'm not going to be successful, so I'm not going to try. But I wanted to try, and I was successful. So having good mentorship, like my mentor was very supportive, and my department and division were very supportive. So I really do like doing both, for different reasons. But they work different parts of my brain, and I will say that they're both very satisfying, and I do really love my job, both the clinical side, but then also the research side. Like I said, research is coming up with ideas and plans, and then doing pilot studies, and and then trying to get results, and then asking for money. It's a lot of steps and a lot of work, but it's really I guess invigorating. But so is the clinical side as well. Taking care of really sick babies, but then seeing them get better. So I really do like both of those. The next question I see is, how do you stay motivated throughout your many years of training in med school? That's a good question too. It goes by really fast. So, and I don't want to scare you. I know you're all younger, right? I'm 46 now, so I'm older, clearly. And I went straight through. So like I said, so I did 4 years of medical school, 3 years of peds, 3 years of neonatology. So I was 32 when I finished my training, which sounds to you guys, to me it sounds crazy old, right? You're like, wow, I've already been in school for X number of years, and then you're going to do this, and you can be 32, and plus you have debt and things like that. Like, all those things in the back of your mind, it goes by super fast, because it's really exciting. You learn all these new things every month, every week. You're doing something new. You're doing something different. It actually goes by super fast. It almost seems like it's not enough time. And when you come out, you're like, oh my God, I'm done. And now I'm in charge. I hope I know what I'm doing. You know what I mean? And you do. But the motivation is learning new things and meeting new people, and doing new things. Just seeing what people do, it goes by really fast. And so this actually goes back to my previous comment about the research. Like I said, I didn't get a PhD. I didn't do extensive research time. My one regret was not taking more time, just taking it, maybe taking a year here or there, or maybe even doing a PhD, which is 4 years. Like, I realize now in hindsight, like that would have been nice in my development. Like I would have been a little more advanced. I would have had a better idea of what I wanted to do with my research or with my career. And it wouldn't, like I said, a year or two here or there isn't going to matter. You're going to make, the debt was the other thing. Like I had a good amount of debt. My wife did, and it goes. You come out, and even as pediatricians, which are quote unquote the lowest paid, you still get paid well, right? Like all that. Now we don't have any more debt. Like I'm done with my training. I'm whatever. Like. And that was years ago. Like I have a different perspective on the time. So that's answering two separate questions. I was motivated because I wanted to learn, and I wanted to be a good doctor, and it was very interesting and exciting. But then I do regret not slowing it down a bit and taking a little more time to enjoy it, instead of kind of, like I said, not necessarily rushing out, but but then finish my training and be like, oh, okay, what now? If that makes sense. The next question from Preston is how coronavirus affected your work. That's a very good question. So obviously heavily, and like everybody else, coronavirus have affected everything. So, in San Francisco, obviously we're super lucky in that we've been basically least affected of the big cities, almost in the entire country. First to mask, people wear their masks for the most part. We're we're about 80% vaccinated now. Obviously, there's this Delta outbreak, but the point is, San Francisco, we never had this crazy surge where the hospitals were full and like we couldn't find providers, and the things in New York and LA, like we never had that. But still, we had to prepare for that. So let me talk a little bit about the clinical care, what we did. Obviously, we had to cut down on all of our elective surgeries and things that could wait. All that stopped because we were waiting for the surge, and we wanted to make sure we were ready for it. And I just work in the newborn nursery. And as you know, kids seem to be a little bit less at risk for getting it and getting a little less sick, but they still get it. So it involved, for a month or two, there was, no visitors to the hospital. Maybe one parent could be at a time for a baby, but that was it. We're all masked, and, for any delivery or any procedure, we had to do the full PPE. We're not used to that. We're always kind of masked and often gown, but not that, it was still a different process. And then slowly things opened up. And it sort of came back. Like now, I'd say we're pretty, except for masking, we're pretty much back to normal. We have been for a few months, but for a few months we were like, everything was remote. All our family meetings were by Zoom. These other people on the team, like the nutritionist and the pharmacist, they were Zooming in. So we would round and we'd have a computer with us on wheels so they could see us and talk to us while we were rounding to minimize the number of people at the bedside. So the work we didn't change, but how we did it changed. And things like, we actually had a lot of sick moms with COVID, and there were very complicated delivery plans, like if mom, because mom was so sick, how to safely deliver the baby and when to safely deliver the baby and those sorts of things. Like I said, hopefully that's mostly, it's not that big a deal now, but those sorts of things. So it took and then, nurse, there's occasionally an exposure. And so like nurses go out or residents go out and some staffing issues, but overall, it's more just about, being prepared and doing our best. We've been able to make it through, but we haven't been that heavily affected. Next question from Nathan is the greatest accomplishment in my career. I would say it's really the there's a lot of, I love both my clinical work and research work, but I've found this niche, the kind of work, the kind of research I do, it's technically called translational basic science research. So what that means is I work with rats and mice where is specific to stroke in full-term neonates, something that's pretty common, which most people aren't aware of. So what we do is we cause the stroke and then we treat it with different things to try to make it better. And we found some things that worked, and that has led to clinical trials in human babies where we're concerned they have brain injury. And so we treat them with these things. It's what we call placebo-controlled trials. So they either get placebo or they get the treatment. And then we follow them for 2 years. And we hope they, and we're still in the midst of this. So in the next few months, we'll get to the end of that 2-year period where we had enrolled 500 babies nationwide in a trial to try to repair the brain after full-term brain injury. So we enrolled 500 babies. The 2-year outcome should be done in October or November. So hopefully early next year we'll know the results. But the point is, so it's translational. So I started with these small animals, and then we find something, and then we take it to the babies. So that's what's called translational, as opposed to, there's other types of basic science where you're focused on, that's like heavy, like molecular and cell biology, focusing on a receptor or a pathway, or maybe working with worms and flies. Like mine is more like, how is what I'm doing with the animal how does that directly relate to how we're taking care of babies? And so the fact that I've successfully done that on the basic science side, and now it's led to a clinical trial, I would say that, like I said, we don't know if the clinical trial worked. Hopefully it does, fingers crossed. But I would say that's a big accomplishment for me, and I get invited to give talks really all over the world about the newborn brain and studying the newborn brain, both the clinical care and the research. Obviously that stopped during COVID. Now it's all been virtual talks. So for example, like I have a conference in Beijing in December and in Buenos Aires in the spring, but those are both virtual. So I'm just going to Zoom in. So, but I get invited to those kind of talks. So I would say, so that people know who I am, and then I've been relatively successful in my research. I would say that's my biggest accomplishment. The next question from Joyce is, what's most fulfilling? I would say it's both the clinical and the research. So the research that I just mentioned, I would say that's very fulfilling. The clinical part, we take care of a lot of sick babies, and some of them, they're going to be sick because, they get a prenatal ultrasound and you see something's wrong with the heart or something else. And so you anticipate that. And it gives parents time to prepare. Obviously, it's very tough news, but it gives them time to prepare for that. Whereas other babies, it's a complete surprise. They come out, or it's another hospital, and and see something, and they're just terrified, right? As anybody would be. They anticipated a normal delivery, and it's not. And the babies, really sick. That doesn't happen that often, but or maybe just mildly sick. But the point is, they're scared, and most of these babies, the vast majority of these babies, they get better and they do fine. And that's not all of them. Like I said, some of these, and I don't want to get too stuck in it. Some babies have these syndromes or lesions or something that they're just not survivable, and that's sad. But our job is to make it, to make that transition, to do what we can for the baby to make them comfortable and to help the parents with that transition. So it's an experience where they can spend some time with their baby and remember it positively. But for, like I said, for 99% of the babies, they get better, right? And so seeing the parents going from terrified to then relieved that things are going to be okay, and having their baby discharged from the hospital, that's very satisfying as a neonatologist. Most babies are going to, they're very resilient. They're going to get better. We almost have to just get out of the way. We just need to support them while they get better, and then they're going to be fine. I would say that that's very fulfilling part of the clinical side of my work. Next question from Jamie: what is something you wish you had done differently from your career that you've learned from? Yeah, I would say, and I kind of alluded to that before, in my training, I kind of wish I'd taken a year or two to do something else, or even earlier, like even in college. Like I never studied abroad. I never, like I said, back then I'm thinking, wow, I have all these things, I want to do medicine and I have all these things to do. I should just get at it, and in hindsight, like I wish I'd taken a little more time either to do research or to do something different from like the regular schoolwork and coursework, or even just taking some time for myself to do some traveling. Obviously, pre-pandemic, we did traveling and stuff like that, so it isn't like the end. But I do wish I'd taken a little more time during my training for myself. The next question from Ashley: how did you go from studying neuroscience to knowing you wanted to help newborns? So good question. So I was interested in neuroscience. That was my major in college. And when I did research experiences in medical school, they were related to neuroscience. Then when I did, it was actually during medical school. So the way medical school is structured generally, now it's actually changing and it depends on the medical school. But classically, it was like 2 years of kind of classroom coursework, and then 2 years of what we call clerkships. Those are rotations in the hospital. And now it's a little more, now places, or it's a little more mixed than that. You start doing you're going in the hospital earlier and you do some coursework later. So that's a little more incorporated, but that was a classic change. So I did 2 years of coursework, and then, I started doing my clerkships. And then I realized, you really find your people. Sorry, this is answering a different question. I guess I'm going to discuss why I chose pediatrics. You're doing the rotations, you meet all these interesting people, and you're doing these things, and you kind of I figured out like during medical, pretty early on, it's like, I kind of like working with kids and not with adults. And I like interacting with the parents, and I like the people I like the other pediatricians. So I figured early on that and you sort of, the phrase, you kind of find your people, you kind of, everybody's different, but it's like, yeah, this I like, or this not so much, right? So I realized I wanted to do pediatrics, but I was interested in a critical care environment, like kind of like, high intensity, very interesting, that sort of thing. And so that naturally led me to neonatology and helping newborns. Then later I realized, I do want to do research. So I was interested in the brain before, and I'm interested in taking care of newborns. So it made sense for me to do brain research specific to newborns. And at UCSF, it's one of the reasons I came to UCSF. UCSF is world renowned in kind of the neonatal brain research in clinical care. So that sort of all led to that. But that was sort of the thought process. So I decided basically, and I'd done a rotation in the NICU in my 4th year of medical school, and I really liked it. So I pretty much decided I was going to do it even before I started my pediatrics residency. I was pretty clear that I wanted to do a neonatology fellowship afterwards.